Hello, everybody. Welcome to the September 29th, 2010 radio show. My name is Peter, of course, and this is lecture number 1, even though it's not quite a lecture. I'd say it's more of a presentation, but it's going to be entitled The Zeitgeist Movement, Current Structure and Processes. Now, before I begin, some of you might have heard the Venus Project had to cancel their Canadian tour because Jacques got a terrible cold and has some issues. They are safely back in Florida now, and Jacques, I heard from Roxanne yesterday, Jacques is doing better. It's nothing super serious, so everyone that's been emailing me, don't worry, I think things are okay. But he is very weak with a very severe cold and some side effects of that cold and sinus-related stuff that I won't go into. But nevertheless, I hope everyone appreciates the tremendous will this individual has and the very fact that they've spent 3.5 some months on the road going place to place to give talks to people about this direction is so tremendous that I just want to reiterate the fact that everyone needs to appreciate this substantially. I can't even imagine how exhausted they must be. I can barely get up in the morning, let alone travel around for 3.5 months. Okay. So basically what I'm going to do today for the next hour is go over everything that's been developed over the course of the past, year and a half of the development of the movement, the self-generating structure that has emerged, which is both logical and novel, and lay it out for those that are not familiar, that might be new, and of course those that are seasoned, that have been here for a while, but might not be familiar with some of the new processes that we're working with and the new structures that we're working with, and also, of course, clarify a lot of things that get brought up consistently, usually in the form of confusion. Let's see here. Before I start, though, before I forget, though, there's going to be a knowledge base entry for every one of these lectures. So there's 8 lectures or talks, and there'll be a knowledge base entry for every one. So later today, I'm going to have a knowledge base entry to describe the general structure and processes of the movement, and you can find that, of course, in the knowledge base. And I'll try to be as technically accurate as I can, hopefully with some graphs and everything else. And I want to apologize for the general knowledge base, a lack of culmination. I'm quite spent right now with multitasking with various things in the film, which I'm going to go through the film here in a second. But anyway, it's been a very, very difficult number of weeks, but we're getting there, and I'm getting there at least, and I'll be very relieved once January comes along, because that's when the film will be released. In fact, let's go ahead and talk about that right now. Zeitgeist moving forward, I hope to have the trailer done and presented by the first week of October, so it's coming up very soon. The trailer will probably be in 2 forms. There'll be 2 trailers. One will be very short, shotgun gesture trailer, as you typically see cliche within the media industry. Second will be an extended trailer, a number of minutes that will go into a little bit of detail that will summarize the sections that I'm working with for the larger film. The distribution of the film and the presentation of the film, well, what we're doing, and I want to make sure everyone understands this, is we're going to do a simultaneous release mid-January of 2011 through all the chapters in hopefully 20, 30 languages. So if I was to loosely describe this, and I'm beginning the process now, there will be 20, 30 languages, simultaneous release in 60-plus countries, all around the weekend, ideally, and this isn't set in stone, of January 15th. The structure of the release itself, as far as monetary, as far as theatrical, obviously this isn't just some Zeitgeist Day thing where someone can take the film and load it into their living room and invite people over. I'm making this as large as possible, and I have to be, unfortunately, very strict with it as well. But basically what's going to happen with this is I'm going to have contracts set up with each of the chapters, the main heads of the chapters. And they are going to take the responsibility of finding a space and financing a space to show the film if they care to do so. Simultaneously, they get everything profit-wise, so to speak. I don't like using that terminology, but whatever is acquired from these screenings will go to that chapter. This is a feeble attempt at getting some funding for the chapters in general. But I think it's relevant, and all this money will go towards promotion of that chapter. Now, this isn't a free-for-all. And I'm taking a big risk here, and I need to speak with a series of lawyers about this regarding the problems that could emerge with such an idea, because this is unprecedented. I'm essentially relying on people to bring the film out and trusting them to be responsible and honest about the tracking of the money. Now, digital purchases will probably be the norm for this, meaning that I'm going to have a programming interface that will basically track ticket sales across the world for anything that's done digitally online through credit cards and the like. And they will be represented in real time through the programming for everyone to see, to also, of course, make sure that we know who's getting what, and to make sure that those funds will eventually be allocated towards promotional work of that particular chapter. There's going to be exceptions to this, and I'm aware of this, but that's okay, and I'm putting a great deal of trust in everybody to move forward with this in a diligent, respectful way. It's again, it's risky, but there's a few different angles to this. For example, I can't personally afford to rent out theaters across the world. The few possible negotiations I have with small theaters out there that could emerge in New York and Los Angeles, for example, theater chains that might find merit with this, and instead of me having to constantly rent out or any group having to constantly rent out something, they will actually finance it themselves, and with some type of negotiation where they keep X amount, and of course the rest goes to the chapter. That's the most ideal circumstance. But overall, the approach will be that the chapters will have to finance the rental, and then they keep what they obtain. I can't rent things out because I'm essentially broke, and it's going to be a very trying period, I think. But nevertheless, I mean, all I can hope for, to be perfectly frank with everybody, is that I can make back with the $5 DVD sales. Of course, the film will be put online for free. The film will be downloadable in torrent form, just like the other films are, for free. Everything will be there for free, so it's the same kind of donation base, where if you want the physical disc and you want to support what I'm doing, well, you can do so. The only caveat to this is that there are some film festivals that I will enter into that will restrict the ability of the film to be online for a certain period of time, and that's a little bit of a problem. But there's also a kind of a workaround with this, because it doesn't say in the rules of most of these situations, that the film can't be purchased or downloaded. So that shouldn't affect the torrents. So while the film might not be viewable in a live setting, say from my Vimeo account through zeitgeistmovie.com, it will be downloadable for viewing for free. Don't hold me to that, because there could be some caveats I'm not seeing. I'm still working this out, but that is the approach. One way or another, it's still going to be there. And anyway, I'll just leave it at that. So, okay, the Zeitgeist movement, structure and processes. What comprises the Zeitgeist movement in form? Everyone out there should know what we think and what our tenets are, but what is the structure of the movement? We have in the movement basically two distinctions of people overall. There are coordinators and there are members, and there are overlapped elements between both parties. For example, I would be the global coordinator, if you will. Now, you'll notice I refrain from using the word leader. The difference between coordinator or organizer or leader is, of course, purely semantic, but leader has a cultural connotation which is faulty. Leadership assumes that there's a central position of power. It assumes that someone knows everything. And if you look at the history of Western civilization, presidents and dictators and leadership, the connotation culturally becomes quite negative. So I am here to do my best to coordinate and organize tasks and keep the tenets of what we're doing in focus, while of course remaining open and emergent to new information. So I just want to make that general distinction, and I like to get the language proper so we don't have any semantic dispute. Anyone who refers to me as a leader or Jacques as a leader really has to be careful, because the cultural connotation is loaded. So coordinators and members, that's what we are. Members and coordinators are hence divided into regional chapters. As I've stated many times, the chapters are the movement. The chapters, physical chapters, are what comprise everything that we do. And if you're not in a chapter, you very much should be. Now, I understand some might have some disabled elements and they can't They can't go to a physical chapter meeting. That's completely understandable. Chapters can operate very, very efficiently in a virtual realm as well, but naturally, in the end, the physical presence is important. The numbers and people are very, very important for a critical mass in order for us to create influence. You know, all the, I don't want to go off on this tangent, but all the attributes of traditional protest that we've gone through, we're not here to get a bunch of people together and yell at buildings in a free speech zone. The actions that the Zeitgeist movement will take in the future, once global critical mass of some level is attained, will be of extreme utility and of direct action, not angrily pontificating and benign protests that have become just so dormant and looked beyond at this stage with no press covering. The actions that the movement will work with, which will be explicitly nonviolent and, in fact, be within the model of, as far as I'm concerned, the American Civil Rights Movement, Martin Luther King, and even Gandhi. These are, historically speaking, the most efficient means of social activism, which is essentially not participating in the games that create the oppression or create the destruction and the problems. Nothing can be stated against that. Nothing can work against groups that simply choose not to participate, and that's the model that we will eventually use. But that's for another conversation. Now, chapters, of course, have a hierarchical construction by the very nature of them. So we have the global chapter, which extends to the country chapters, which extend to state, regional, province chapters. Those three layers are pretty much all you need at this stage. Granted, you can go even farther. For example, we might have a university system where universities can create their own groups, and they can exist within the respective state or city chapter that the university exists in. Now, on the subject of chapters, we have information flow. Now, this is important because it's a question that's brought up a lot, even though I've always considered it to be self-evident. How does anyone participate in the Zeitgeist movement? Are we an open democracy where every single person who's a member will just vote on something? No, not at all. We are not a democracy in the sense of traditional democracy, because traditional democracy is based on the failure of technical resolve. In other words, the only reason anyone would ever need to vote on anything is because a technological or rational solution cannot be arrived at with the amount of information available, digested in an objective way. Now, I know that sounds like a loaded thing for a lot of people that have never heard of such a statement. I think if we have some new people listening, let me briefly expand on that. Democracy is mob rule in its purest sense. Mob rule is 10 white men hanging one black man. In the case of the United States, we established this thing called the Constitution, which is an empirical balancer, if you will, semi-empirical, which says, okay, every statement here has to be respected with regard to the decisions of mob rule, whether it be mob rule of Congress or whether it be mob rule of the electorate. This Constitution is going to eventually be replaced by science and the scientific method. The only true natural constitution that can possibly exist is scientific and natural law, hence physics, hence everything that creates everything around you that you see right now, listening to me speak, viewing your computer screens, the cars that you drive, the way you get food, the way food is grown, the absolute natural processes that guide all of our lives, the fact that if you don't eat, you will die, if you don't drink water, you will die, if you don't have air to breathe, you will die. And all of the extrapolation that can be obtained presents a case for a systems awareness of the natural order of reality, which is emergent and we are discovering things about all the time. In society today, we do not focus on this at all. We are based on a folk way of operation that's so archaic and old, it boggles the mind. But I won't go on that tangent. So, back to my point. The natural constitution, if you will, of global society is science, is physical law, and we need physical reference to make all the decisions that we need. A resource-based economy is based explicitly upon resources and natural processes and not human subjective opinion, except with regard to higher-level arbitraries such as human value. Now, please note, when I say human value, I don't mean that anything anyone wants is not obtainable. This is, for another conversation, which will occur later in the lecture series if that statement strikes you as obtuse. But nevertheless, arbitrary human values are human values produced by culture and not by actual need. Wants are cultural human values. Needs are direct physical necessities. So anyway, let's get back to the chapters. Chapters in general have a great deal of freedom. We don't tell chapters what to do. I myself, as a global coordinator working with the international chapters, do not direct everyone to do whatever they need to do. There's a great deal of freedom based on the general tenets of communication that we put forward over and over again, which I'll go through a little bit in a bit as well, because that's a part of what I wanted to discuss. So if you have a chapter in, say, Mississippi, Bolton, Mississippi, we'll use that Bolton, Mississippi as a city chapter, a regional chapter within the state chapter. Of course, Mississippi is within the country of the United States, so that is the international chapter. So what you have are 4 tiers of chapter organization. You have the international chapters, you have the country chapters, you have the state chapters, and then you have the local or regional or city chapter. Now, a very critical point about the chapters is their intention is to be holographic as a whole. In other words, we don't want there to be a systemic relationship to the chapters. We want to see an environment where each chapter knows enough and is competent enough that it doesn't require any type of direction from, say, the global coordinators, such as myself. This is the kind of environment we need to create and why everyone really needs to be educated. So if something happens in one country, say in Germany, the Germany chapter undergoes some type of problem and the chapter becomes dysfunctional. Well, the other chapters around Germany can step in and take up the slack, whatever that may mean for the circumstance. Let's say, for example, even the global chapter website goes down. Well, boom, all the other country websites pick up the slack and everyone will be migrated to somewhere else. These are kind of poor examples, but the point is holographic, where there's no identifiable source, and this is so critical to the structure of the movement. This movement has to be almost invisible from the standpoint of operation. So if there ever is, I hate to say it, some form of oppression of any chapter, the other chapters can step up and rescue, if you will. This type of movement could undergo a great deal of scrutiny through time. It could be given lots of names. It wouldn't surprise me if it was eventually referred to as a, quote, terrorist group, given the neurotic psychology that the power establishment pushes forward and unfortunately the public tends to believe. However, that's not going to hold any water whatsoever when you have a global movement that has no heads in any location, that is completely holographic, that it doesn't matter who anyone was taken out if that was the circumstance. There will always be someone somewhere with the information, with the understanding, with the initiative to move forward, whether they're, quote, coordinators or members. Eventually they all merge together. That's the ideal, and it's extremely important everyone understands that. So don't look up to me for anything. I might not always be here. You have to be aware enough of all the tenets to make sure that you can pick up where someone else might fall that's in a position of so-called leadership. The more individuals within our movement are highlighted, the more attacked they will become, and the moment, frankly, that certain instances of us become too publicized is when they recede in other members in this sort of PR lecture team. I'm going to go over the teams in a little while. That's when they rise up and they confuse the establishment, because the establishment will try to demonize the leaders, which will try to demonize, quote, leaders, which will try to demonize the entire movement. This is an age-old propaganda campaign, an age-old propaganda tactic used. I can go on many different examples of that type of phenomenon. So we need a holographic, leaderless environment, non-hierarchical in the sense of that there's no power establishment telling everything what to do, which can eventually be removed. This is why we keep harping on this, so I hope that's fairly clear. Now, obviously, there's a long way to go with that, because we're in a preliminary phase of the movement, as I've described before. We're in an educational phase. We have to get people up to speed. We have to get coordinators that can speak about these things in their local communities, which will, again, as I'll describe in a moment, become, in effect, the PR and lecture team. We can give it whatever names, but basically every coordinator out there should be out speaking to their communities as, well, ideally. I'm not going to put the pressure on anyone that's not comfortable to do so, but that is the ideal. Excuse me for meandering here. I'm all over the place, aren't I? let's get back to information flow with the chapters, which I believe is where I began. Information flow moves both directions through the tiers of the hierarchy, even though that's not exactly what this word implies in a traditional sense. When the international global coordinators want to initiate something, if we want to do a global effort, some type of global display, event, well then obviously it comes from the top down, but yet interaction comes back from the bottom up. So if you are in Bolton, Mississippi? If you're in Bolton, Mississippi, and you have an idea, well, you discuss it amongst your members in Bolton, Mississippi. The coordinator of the Bolton chapter, subchapter, would take that information, that idea, to the Mississippi state level, which is discussed amongst the states in all 50 states of the country. The coordinator of the country would then bring that concept to the international community, the international chapters, which are discussed with all 60 or so international chapters. That's essentially the top, and that's enough that we can deal with to generate ideas. As of now, we haven't been overwhelmed. I mean, it's pretty simple what we have to do right now at this stage, which is educational. But once programs develop and we expand, then obviously more things will come up. So I hope that makes sense. I don't want to belabor anything, but the information flow is fairly simplistic through the different tiers of the hierarchy in both directions. Now, regarding chapter actions, regarding what the chapters are doing now, I would really hope that you have a meeting at least once a month, as I've stated. Meetings are important, either virtual or in real time. I would also like to encourage the coordinators of the chapters to have their own radio show, just as I do. Even though I, of course, have been busy, but nevertheless, even if you can only do 15 minutes once every 2 weeks, just to give that presence out there, please do so. That is very, very important. Basically, any type of media action you can come up with. Another great idea is if you can speak about these things, as I mentioned prior, speaking to the coordinators right now, try to make, say, a video of yourself talking about a specific subject and put it on YouTube, put it on any type of video display site. Flooding the internet is very, very important. Right now we have hit campaigns against us of very childish nature, but they tend to get people to actually watch these things because they simply flood the internet. Everyone here needs to be flooding the internet with important information about what we're doing, not to mention creating a presence, a personal presence, where you have the courage to put yourself out there just as we all do. One example of this was Brandy Hume, who did a video called the Venus Project Challenge, and she set a little precedent there that I'd never seen before, of someone just simply making a video to talk about it, generating interest. If all of us did this, I, of course, inadvertently do it. What I do ends up being posted anyway, but everyone else out there, do something. Do something and get it up there. That's very important. As far as general future chapter activist stuff, here's what I plan on doing after the release of Zeitgeist moving forward. I intend to try and set a precedent for physical town hall style meetings. Basically, I would go to a theater, and once a month I would utilize this theater and have an open to the public forum. This, of course, is again within the model of the American Civil Rights Movement. It is where you collect people. You present an open forum where anyone can come in. Obviously, there are certain caveats to security and things like that, but that will be taken as it comes. And my hope is that once a month there will be open forum town hall meetings occurring across the world, and basically for the necessity of recruitment. It seems old and archaic, but that type of presence is important. Imagine gaining popularity in, say, Chicago, where you do this once a month, and slowly you get more members, slowly you get media and press, slowly it becomes bigger, and eventually you have thousands and thousands of people coming from all over the Illinois area to attend this once a month open forum town hall meeting. I say open forum as a general distinction. It could be a lecture series, it could be anything. Just simply letting people talk and discussing it with new people. It's an old tactic, and it happens to work. And again, it creates a physical presence. We're not going to survive just on the internet. I'm going to stop there. I think that's enough for the chapters to understand. I've talked about information flow. I've talked about basic organization. And, of course, the meetings are very, very important. If you are an international chapter coordinator and you haven't been going to the international meetings, well, you need to. If you are a state coordinator in the United States, you haven't been going to the state coordinator meetings, you really need to. That's very critical. And, of course, the other attribute is the website maintaining. That should be self-evident. And by the way, if anyone out there, again, is not in a chapter, please do so. And if there isn't a chapter in your area, please start one. And that can be as simple as getting a website. We have on the Zeitgeist Movement site a template that you can download that should be easily installable. I haven't seen it recently, but it should still be there. I believe it's in our wiki. And of course, you have to get a hosting site, but almost anyone can get a hosting site for a couple dollars a month now, so it's hardly a large-scale cost. But just start it yourself. Just put anything up, anything, really, in any place in the world. This is how it begins. So just please try not to be shy. We can't be shy in this type of environment. I'm not doing this for fun. This isn't something that I enjoy per se, even though I really appreciate meeting people. We have less than 30 years, as far as I'm concerned, before a complete civil breakdown. And I'm not going to go into the specifics of that. But the more things break down, it works both in the general favor of the movement, in the sense it will change values and change viewpoints, but it can reach a point of no return in a temporal sense where it will further distort and make things that much more difficult to overcome. But that's for another conversation. Before I forget, we do have a dedicated site for chapters information, zmchapters.com. This site is not updated yet, I'm afraid, but it will have information on our meetings as far as recordings of the meetings, as far as dates of the meetings. It will have protocols for operation, networking forum, resources where people can upload things that they've been doing within their chapters, etc. So check that out when we get it up. And one more thing, money issues for chapters. As I stated, with the release of Zeitgeist moving forward, it will be an attempt to give some kind of promotional money, meaning money to be used for promotional purposes. Note, and that will be explicitly explained, but the money's not there to pay anybody for anything. It's there to be used to create flyers, to create banners, to hold events or small events, to do anything in the community. It's just to help out a little bit. And I really have no idea what's going to happen with that, if it will be even viable, but we can at least try, and it's really the best I can offer. But beyond that, as I've stated before, there are shirts. Obviously, we sell a shirt at the Global Zeitgeist Movement to support the administrative costs. I've stated that everyone can do that. Now, we're not here for explicit merchandising. I don't want to see any chapter site with tons of crap out there selling it. That's very bad for our image, not to mention I will not tolerate any form of monetary corruption or exploitation. But having a simple shirt that represents the movement, a custom one that maybe your chapter makes, it's a shirt for your chapter. And providing that for sale in a live setting or through the website is not a problem. That's absolutely reasonable if you're maintaining a chapter site and any small things that you might be doing. And any type of other projects, and we've talked about this before as well. So the second level of money related to chapters, and if you're going to have to raise money for anything, you have to make it 100% transparent. There's a thing called chip-in you can get, which can connect to different payment services. Say you need to say you want to have a screening of a film, you want to rent a theater, and it costs $400, and you do a fundraising campaign for that. You have to be very, very clear about that, and all that money has to be transparent and shown on the site through the chip-in. And we might, at the global site, in the event there is abuse, which has occurred in the past, we might just audit you. We're not going to take anything from you. We're just going to make sure that no one's out there doing things for the wrong reason. But please note that any type of donations that are going to occur within your chapter or subchapter does have to be cleared by the global site if you're going to use our name. Ideally, we don't want this donation process. There's a very, very important reason for this because of the fact that money has psychological propensities built into it that will, I'm sorry to say, corrupt people. Everything money tends to touch, on average, turns to shit. And I mean that very explicitly. So if you want to get a donation for anything like an event, you have to tell the international coordinator, which will come to the global coordinators. and then you'll get approval to do so, and everything has to be transparent, and etc. Okay, now let's move on to teams. Teams and projects, essentially, they would go together. The zeitgeistmovement.com, you can go to the Take Actions tab and drop down to the Projects button. This button will eventually be changed to just say Teams, I believe. But nevertheless, when you participate in the movement, obviously the first step is to join the movement, to join your local chapter, in other words. And then the next step, to be proactive, is to try and help out with some of the teams that we do. Obviously, actions within your community chapter can be busy enough where you might not even have time for the teams, but some people, maybe in more dormant chapters or have specific skills, do have the time to participate in our teams. We have updated our team structure quite substantially. It's been almost completely overhauled. When we first set up the teams, for those of you that had joined previous lists, you will have to join new lists eventually. The site page is not quite updated. There's still some contact information and email lists that need to be created, but this will be happening very, very soon. Again, we used to have a kind of a broad sense of teams, technology team and communications team. What we've realized as things have kind of unfolded is that the teams are almost all communicative in some form or another, and I'm going to go through them right now. The first team I'd like to bring up, which has been around for a while, which has been directed by Ray, or also known as G-Man on the forum, do a tremendously good job, and it's one of the most complex teams in an odd way, or I guess one of the most arduous teams, I'll put it that way, is the linguistic team. The linguistic team has been doing robust stuff, and they are the bridge of communication between all the languages, so they're very, very critical. If anyone out there does have a bilingual or multilingual capacity, please help us out if you have the time with the linguistic team. The next team would be, I'm going to go arbitrarily through this list, would be the lecture public relations team. As I've stated, most coordinators of chapters, I would hope, would have the ability to speak about what they're doing, or at least have people amongst them, if they're just simply doing admin stuff, to take the role of speaking about what we're doing. For example, when we do the release of the film, it's not just to show the film. I'm hoping that the chapters will actually be able to keep the audience after the film is over and speak with them about the movement directly after, and have a Q&A of sorts with the chapter coordinator or anyone that's able to speak. So anyway, lecture public relations team is very, very critical. Obviously, I would be a part of this. Anyone that's been out there that has been speaking about this in an intelligent way, such as Neil, or those, obviously there's different layers of understanding here. I can't say I know definitively amongst many different people that go out and talk about these things, like, for example, Ben McLeish. I can't say I know definitively how educated everyone is because I have never had a chance to sit down with everyone that is being communicative and proactive in a personal sense and weighed their knowledge. But there are emerging individuals that have stood out quite substantially and know what they're talking about. Douglas Millett, hopefully I said his last name correctly. In the past, we were talking about trying to institute a more direct way to get the teams organized, get the lecture team organized, so the information flow and the way we present it is consistent. And in time, I hope we will do that. But for right now, it's really open to people that can kind of show their abilities. For example, if you have an interest in kind of being a part of this, and by the way, these are the individuals that will make it to, say, the news. These are the individuals that will be called in to meet with their local radio stations. I am probably going to get to a point where I'm going to start pawning off interviews with radio stations or even television to other people because I can't do it. So there's things like this that will come to fruition for sure. But back to my point, if you have an interest in trying to express yourself in this way, simply create a lecture. There are so many subtopics that I have yet to address in my talks, and I haven't heard addressed in other people's talks. For example, if you wanted to approach, say, advanced agriculture as a way to address the coming possible energy crisis in relationship to fertilizers that are derived from hydrocarbons. This is a subject that I have been doing a lot of research on, but I've never seen a specific talk about in general. And there are many other sub-attributes that you could do a lecture on. So do a lecture, even if it's just in front of a wall, even if it's just you, and put it online and send it to us. And if it's of value, well, first of all, I mean, you can post it on the forum, and I'm sure people will give you their critiques. It'll be a learning expression, a learning experience, excuse me. And if it's of value, then a relationship will be created. I mean, if someone's willing to make a 30-minute to hour-long lecture on this stuff, I'm certainly not going to ignore it. I don't see this very often, unfortunately. And while I do see people take the existing lectures and present them, I think that's great. But everyone needs to start thinking proactively about this stuff, because I could write lectures on so many different specific attributes that could be addressed both technologically or sociologically, endlessly. And I hope other people kind of have that understanding as well, that it's almost endless, the angles of exploration that relate to what we're talking about. So, all right, let's move on to the developers team. I believe this team is more or less coordinated by Daniel and Anya at this stage, and from what I have seen, the developers team is very robust. Of course, developers deal with programming, they deal with databases. We have a lot of improvements we want to do to the websites and the arrangement of the websites and how they interact. The Zeitgeist Media Project website, of course, is a product of the developers team and is always undergoing improvements and things as such. So please join the developers team through the projects page. And if you have experience and the know-how to participate in that fashion, there's always wonderful ideas coming through there. Newsletter and press release team. This was the fourth team I'm going to discuss. The newsletter team, as you know, we have had two newsletters. We are operating on a bi-monthly basis right now based on quality submissions and time people have to allocate for editing and, of course, translation. We're slowly expanding with this. The newsletter press release team is actually more or less an internal team at this stage, meaning there's a set of people that work closely in the administrative way to evaluate submissions. But the real contribution here is obviously for the content itself. So you can email us the newsletter article that you'd like to submit, or in fact the press release you'd like to submit. We probably will make it more advanced press release team, a dedicated press release team, but that's on the back burner, which will send out periodic press releases about many of the subjects that come up in the news. It's almost endless. If I had time, I'd send out a press release every week about the growing economic crises and the causes of it that no one pays attention to. But I just don't have the time to do so. So if anyone out there wants to submit either a press release or an article for the newsletter, the email is on the project's page. Okay, media project and event team. This is a multifaceted team which is in development. The media project is essentially a submission platform right now, internet-based, which people can submit their audio, video, and visual and other programming media to the site for everyone to view. It's zeitgeistmediaproject.com for those that are not familiar. I think it's a wonderful development. Trying to get more interest in it overall. I'd like to create a better community for it, but as of right now, the team isn't much of a team. Angelos has been coordinating that along with the YouTube channel and basic multimedia stuff, communication stuff through media. But that will change through time. What I'd like to do after Zeitgeist Day of 2011 is create a media project day or a media project, Zeitgeist Media Project Festival, and I've been throwing this around for a while. Zeitgeist Day, of course, is a very intellectual day. It's a day where where intellectual concepts about the movement are explored, lectures are given, and the chapters are updated and everything else. Progress status. However, as you all know from my background, I believe heavily in aesthetic communication. I think you can tell someone something intellectually all day, but if you can frame it in an emotionally provocative way, you have a much better chance of getting through to them and crossing those barriers of identification. We live in a TV culture, and when people see war on television, even if it's a real war, they almost don't find a differentiation. But if you were to bring somebody to the battlefield in Afghanistan and see the horror firsthand, to see the death and destruction, I guarantee you their opinions of war might change. They just might change as opposed to just seeing it in this abstraction. So you can tell someone something all day. You can tell somebody about, the need for a value shift in society all day. But I really believe the role of art as a functional, communicative medium is to create something is to communicate something socially important. Look at John Lennon's Imagine and the influence that song, probably one of the most prolifically understood or relayed songs of all time. So anyway, eventually I want to have an actual event day. And this could be profoundly effective. We could finally pull in maybe artists. As you know, Natasha Atlas had an album come out with samples of myself and Jacques entitled in English In the State of Reversal. And this whole album is essentially gestured around the value shift that we talk about and the need for a resource-based economy. And the press releases on that, the reviews have all mentioned the Zeitgeist movement and the Venus Project. It's very, very kind of her to do this, and she believes in it, and I've spoken with her. But perhaps she would come in and help us out with this festival, this media project, this something to bring in the masses in an aesthetic way. And as you all know, most likely, politicians don't hold a candle to media personalities. And I believe it's just a matter of time before this value thing becomes almost trendy, as much as I hate to say it, where people see socially active work, especially with the breakdown, as something that makes them feel more viable to society. And odds are they might actually really believe it as well. So it works on multiple levels. I hate to sound pessimistic about it, but there might be people that actually believe in the movement and be willing to promote it. And we're talking big-time individuals that you see of very high entertainment value, if you will, in the popular culture. I'm not going to drop any names because it doesn't matter, but imagine what would happen if a very, very large star was to promote the Zeitgeist movement. That would do more for our need of value shift than anything that any politician could ever do at this stage. So I hope that is important. So the Media Project, Media Event team is ongoing and developing. As of right now, if you want to participate in the team, there is a newsletter and an email for it. An email for it where you can be on a newsletter list for any type of updates. And we'll have that team develop as we move along. Okay, moving on non-linearly in no particular order. The fifth team I want to mention is not in development whatsoever, but unfortunately it's going to be relevant eventually, is the legal team. This is something that if anyone out there works in a legal capacity, if you have any experience, as you all know, we put down the legal system, but we also recognize the necessity for the legal system and the structure we live in. So don't think because we put the system down doesn't mean we have no use for it. Same thing goes for the issues of security and protection. While I think the prison system is an absolute abomination, we should never punish any human being on this planet for anything. There's a huge difference between punishment and restraint. People do need to be restrained in certain circumstances, especially in this sick culture. But the concept of punishment put forward is such an atrocity and it creates more aberrancies than anything else, but I'm going to stop there. The legal team, as we grow larger, more conflicts will arise, and defamation of character, propaganda campaigns. We have to have an establishment tool to use to combat the noise that will come at us. And I'm trying to avoid having to deal with any type of financial structure for a legal team. What I'd like is a reserve of people that have legal experience that would be willing to donate their time for any specific issue that might come up. I'm going to leave it at that because it's an ongoing development, but it has something that we've talked about in the past, and unfortunately, I think will come up in the future. So, I'll leave it at that. Sixth team I'd like to mention is simply the web admin team. These are the people that work behind the scenes to make sure the websites are working up to date, and the moderators, of course, that work the forums, and anything that's admin related, moderation or web. This is basically a back-end team. While you can email the web administrator for any specific issues, this isn't exactly a forward team. So if you do have strong web capacities, frankly, I think you would join the developers team but in the event we have to solicit for help for moderators or the admin team, then you'll hear about that. But nevertheless, that's the team that exists, even though it isn't something that's directly active. It's a very sensitive issue for administration on the website because there's security access to all of our databases, so we can't just hand that out to anybody that joins the team, obviously. And moderators, of course, have to be filtered. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. Of course, we have the chapters team. This would be, I guess, our 7th team, or our 8th team. And the chapters team, of course, is really just the coordinators of the entire chapters relationship. So the coordinators I spoke about earlier comprise the chapters team, and that's more or less an abstract team as well, but there is a need for mailing lists and communication amongst all coordinators, regardless of what level of the tier structure that you are on. Then we have the technology team, which is going to be headed by Douglas Mallet. I'm going to have to laugh at myself when I finally realize how to pronunciate the last name. I believe it's Mallet, but I want to say Mallet and give it a nice French twang to it. It's just like I say Jacques Fresco has a nice quality as opposed to Jacques Fresco. Anyway, ignore me. Technology team. This is going to be a developing team, and this could be very, very relevant as we get from Earth to Venus going, which is a back burner project that we've been dealing with for a long time. Essentially, right now, the technology team, and we're going to create a whole section on the website for this, probably its own tab, is simply to explore and to document the advanced technologies that we have. So this team, once we get it going, will be a submission, and the forum has been utilized in certain capacity because we have a technology section, but a submission of anything anyone finds regarding new technology that relates to social concern. So any advanced agriculture, any advanced energy concepts. It's a hub for just any new stuff that you hear about. And this is great because we need a database of this stuff. This is where things begin and originate, and then we can compile where we are at this stage as far as scientific progress and possibility. And there's always something new coming out almost every day within the technological field, and many of them go unnoticed because they can't be, quote, financed. There's no investment, and often they're too sustainable to be of any interest to the corporate structure as it exists. So anyway, let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 chapters, 9 teams as of now, which can be referenced. The relationship of the teams, as I mentioned, some of them are just mailing lists to be updated about, some of them are actual joins, and some of them are by appointment only. And that's that for teams. All right, let's see. We covered the chapters. We covered the nature of coordinators and members. We also covered the new teams, and their development will be posted on the projects page. The chapters site, zmchapters.com, will be updated fairly soon. A summary of the following structure with a little bit more detail will be presented in the knowledge base. As far as future projects, I talked about a few things with that. I'm going to end with talking about member psychology for a second. Naturally, as people come into the movement, they're coming from very diverse backgrounds. We have, well, I'm not even going to go through the general paths that I've recognized, but it's actually a very good thing. We have people of all nationalities. We have people of all ages. I met someone recently, an 11-year-old, who was involved in the movement. It really kind of blew my mind. And the diversity is wonderful, but that's really kind of an aside. What I want to talk about is the way people generally approach the movement and how they think about the movement. I've talked about this before, but it's worth reiterating. You don't have to spend 12 hours a day, as I do, doing work with the movement or movement-related materials. Not everyone has the time to do that. Obviously, we live in a culture where time is money. And it's just the very nature of the system, and all of us have to play the game in some capacity. That is the way it is. And you can't just forego the real world that you see around you because of this aspiration we have. So you have to be practical and responsible. Simultaneously, you need to make the movement a part of your daily routine, a part of your life. You need to be active with it in even a passive way if you don't have the time to do anything else. If you're on your way to work, perhaps you have some discs of the orientation video that you might just leave, say, I don't know, at a coffee shop where you get your coffee, or some pamphlets, anything that you can think of in a casual sense. Again, it's holographic. If everyone out there did something, a little bit of something every day or every week, whatever you can do, you'd be amazed at the effect that this can take, especially as we grow larger. And on the other side of the spectrum, I meet some people that are far too extreme, that say how they've stopped paying their credit cards, and they've basically rejecting the system in a very personal sense, and I would say a very irresponsible sense, from the sort of temporal longevity that I see within the system. Obviously, if you're incapacitated, if you're in an upside-down mortgage, if you're in a great deal of debt, well, then it's an unfortunate reality, and you're an unfortunate victim of this society in many ways. But don't disregard your responsibility to the current system as an individual and think that it's just going to magically, you're going to be magically saved by the Zeitgeist movement, or a resource-based economy is just going to pop up tomorrow. We all know that that's not going to happen. This change can happen very rapidly, but we have a lot of work to do on the culture before anyone will even consider what we're talking about, because it's so profoundly foreign to them. And in the end, back to the activist notion, single individual rejection is not going to be as effective as group rejection, which is why the critical mass is so important, which is why I think in time we will be able to facilitate the transition and guide it away from the severe bottom of collapse and into a new system by group pressure. As a very simple example, if 50% of the United States population decided not to pay income taxes, do you think the U.S. government is going to prosecute that many millions of people? No. They run away with their tail underneath their legs. Critical mass is all we can depend on and hope for. This is the method. The idea of getting to a leader is always there, and we will always try to get to any leader that wants to initiate this and to go from a top down. But the probability of that happening, in my analysis, is very, very slim, until maybe the breakdown makes it to a point where the leader can help out. But once again, even if a country was to do this, they're going to be susceptible of the breakdown from the countries around them. So we have this global relevance to the problems, to the solution that we provide. So anyway, I won't belabor it, and I'm going to end this program now, and I'll see you guys next week for really the beginning of the lecture series, because this is more of just a review of the procedures and internal processes, etc., which will regard the dynamics of a resource-based economy. Okay, everybody take care.